Today's episode is one of my favorites because we're joined by Rabah, the CMO of TripleWhale, and we talk about why he quit his agency to actually go and work with TripleWhale, how he went from being a one-man contributor to building out a team, and the skills you need to build to become an executive and manage a leadership team at a high level. Let's dive right into the episode. Hey everybody, I'm super excited for today's episode because today we're joined by Rabah, the CMO at TripleWhale, and a fun human being overall. So welcome, man.
Hey, thank you for having me on the podcast, and thank you for your graciousness and flexibility. We've been planning this for a while, and there was been a couple reschedules. I felt really bad, so I appreciate you for still having me on after a couple reschedules. That was very, very kind of you, especially. It was just really cool to connect. I'd been following you kind of in the Twitterverse, and then we finally got to meet in person, so that was really cool.
Yes, for sure. And I'm super excited for this episode because I feel like talking with you is like talking with 1,000 e-com operators at once because you have so much data. You see what everyone is doing, and I think it's going to be a very exciting episode. But a story that I think would be interesting for me is prior to TripleWhale itself. This is how we like to start the podcast. Your story prior to TripleWhale yourself. You're running your agency. So How did you get into marketing? How did you run your agency? And why did you decide to go from, running your business to working at TripleWhale?
Yeah, no, great questions. And I think of that honestly a lot now as the stress ratchets up. No, I'm just kidding. So actually, I go all the way back to uni. I went to school for economics. So I wanted to be an investment banker at one point in time. Then I didn't want to be an investment banker. I got really into photography, websites, AWS builds, just super, super nerdy stuff. Ended up linking up with a really good friend's wife. She was a really big yogi at the time on Instagram. She was like a yoga influencer. And so we ended up connecting and then doing ebooks together. So I went out, they bought a house in Costa Rica. So I flew out to Costa Rica, photographed her. Shout out Steph, she's amazing. And then put all the books together, built everything in Canva, which is I would not recommend, but it was a perfect example of if I would have taken the time to learn like Adobe InDesign or some professional tool, it wouldn't have got done. And even after, so the subsequent books, I did learn those tools and like made them all fancy and professional. And the first book that we made on Canva was still our best-selling, most profitable book. So there's a lesson in that of you can get caught in tool masturbation where it's like, oh, I need this to do this or I need this to do that. You really don't. Like, just get it done, figure it out. So that was my first foray into ads where we would run ads. And then this is when Facebook was just a money machine. She would literally post and then I would just retarget people that engaged with her posts and we would just print money. And it was just this really cool feeling of like, wow, this is the thing. So from that, I went to a luxury real estate brokerage to do marketing there. From that, I moved on to Whole Foods. This is all in Austin. I ran the whole paid media recruitment vertical at Whole Foods. Really awesome company, but hippie corporate, even though it was hippie corporate's just not my jam. Then I moved to a big agency out of New York called Flatiron. I got to work with Oprah, spent millions and millions of dollars on app install ads. It was also a very unique time because the market was really frothy. And so there was not really any regard for profitability. It was one of those growth at all costs type of thing. So we were spending like a ton of money for clients like Wag, Clutter, Jackpocket, all these really big app install ads. And there would be this big upfront cost to acquire people on the back end. So it was really interesting. And I had never done app install ads. I'd never done anything with like Amplitude or AppsFlyer where you have an MMP where you're aggregating all this data. You have to do cohorting, very, very complex ad buying. And then from that, I went and started my own agency. And then I met AJ on Twitter. I actually invested. TripleWhale was my first private investment. So I actually invested in the company before, and then we just kind of started bantering back and forth. Like, hey, how would you market this? How would you do this? What do you think we should do? They liked some of my ideas. We did a little honeymoon period in August, and then I've been full-time CMO since September. But what's really crazy is I was pretty much like a one-man marketing department from basically August to February. So there was just, it's a lot. And so that has been a big change. I need to write something on this or do a video on it or something, because ultimately I'd been in like the corporate term is called an IC, where you're an individual contributor, where you basically just own your little silo and you push things forward, versus moving into an executive role. There's just different value vectors. You spend your time on different things. Quite frankly, you just don't build as much. It's more of like a decision synthesis, where you're just synthesizing the information that comes in and then handing out tasks and stuff of that nature. So that was a big change for me. It was a hard change. I do like it now. I'm very into it. I'm running a team of like 10 people now on the marketing team. And so it's been really, really awesome. Hiring is really hard, which I didn't realize. The other thing that's kind of crazy, and I'm in the weeds a little bit, but is like team morale. Like I didn't realize, because again, I'd always run a small shop, or we would always be in this IC role where it's like, I don't care about morale. I just want to crush. Whereas in a leadership role, you just, these things matter, like having your team motivated, having your team excited, having your team aligned. People have a feeling that there's a purpose behind the work they're doing. It's crazy. It's like, so that was something that was also very eye-opening to me, where there was, I think I was driving home from work one day and I was thinking about like team building activities. Like previous Rabah would have laughed at me, like, why are you wasting your time on that nonsense, dude? Get them to work. You know, we need output. So it's been a really cool ride. AJ and Max have been the best bosses ever. Like they're just incredible people. Max in particular, that's who I roll up to, and who I do my direct reporting to and stuff like that. He's just been really awesome, kind of shepherding me through this journey. Just a really awesome sounding board, therapist, strategist. It's been really crazy. But yeah, that's kind of how I went from wanting to be an investment banker to running the marketing for one of the fastest growing SaaS startups.
Amazing. Right now, what are the biggest differences? Maybe what are skills you needed to learn to go from that, like, you know, individual contributor position to that executive position?
Yeah, great question. A few things. One, storytelling. So you really have to make sure you can build narratives, because when you get into this role, again, people need to buy into what they're doing. Not only your direct reports and people on your team, but also the other people on the executive leadership team, because they're like everybody, for lack of a better analogy, like everybody's kind of running their own fiefdom, and like AJ and Max are kind of like the kings that everybody rolls up to. And so you have a lot of autonomy, but at the same time, there's a lot of responsibility given with that autonomy. So you need to make sure that you're communicating effectively. They know what you're doing. I had a really great boss at Whole Foods who told me, if I have to ask you how something's going, you're not communicating enough. And so that's something that I really try and over communicate with them. So being able to really narrative build, which was easy in a sense, because that's where agency life came in handy, where being able to build a narrative around data is really important. Time management has been something that, so I do time blocking now, use a really cool tool called AkiFlow, and basically my day is planned out from when I get up to at the end. So that has been something where I don't have any free time, which is something that kind of bugs me a little bit, but you know, it just is what it is, where I'm just very planned out throughout my day. So that was a big shift for me, where before, when I was running my agency, I basically had 3 meetings a week, and, you know, everything else was my time. So that was a big challenge. Understanding how to communicate with my direct reports was a really big deal. So I did a lot of research and landed on, we do hour meetings every week. And so this isn't everybody. This is just the people that roll up to me, and then they have people under them. I don't meet with the people under them, just the kind of lieutenants, if you will. But every week we'll meet, and then they fill out a Notion doc. So I do everything in Notion. So having to build these systems was something that was really hard, because there's not really, or maybe there is, I just couldn't find it, kind of like a playbook to go from an individual contributor to basically running your own department. And so every week they have to fill out a form, where it's biggest win, biggest opportunity, what you're looking forward to most, and any blockers. And then we just go through that form on the one-on-one call. So I hate meetings, which is ironic, because like my whole week is like meetings now. But they're just kind of a nature of the beast. So being able to cut out meetings as much as possible, but also the direct report time is actually really helpful, because I don't know if you guys are familiar with Agile at all or something like that, but basically like people work in sprints on my team. Yeah, so people work in sprints on my team, and basically, not that they don't ever talk to me throughout the week, but like that one-on-one is basically reviewing where they were, where they are, and where they're going, and making sure that they're aligned on the resources they need, the processes they need to get done, et cetera, et cetera. And I found that a week is a perfect time where if they do stray off the path a little bit, it's not like detrimental to the fundamentals of the company. Whereas if we don't touch base for 2 or 3 weeks, they can get pretty off path. And so I found that week cadence is pretty good. What else have I had to learn? There's been a lot of travel, so having to integrate, this isn't even business stuff, but just trying to figure out how to integrate my life into the new early stage startup. So like being able to still show up in my friendships, in my romantic relationship, like struggling with my health a little bit, trying to figure out where that I prioritize that stuff. So all of it kind of rolls up into priorities and time management. So I'm still kind of palpitating the elephant here and there, but the biggest things that I had to learn that expedited my learning curve was 1, building systems, 2, really trying to focus time. One of the things when you get into an executive role is everybody has a question or everybody has this, and like context switching can just be chaotic. So that time blocking has been really superb to start to mitigate some of that stuff. And then also still trying to be human, right? Like, so I'm hyper capitalist. I still want to drive metrics, drive results, et cetera, et cetera. But at the end of the day, like, you have other humans working for you, with you. And so making sure that, like, so in that third question, what are you looking forward to most? That doesn't necessarily have to be work related. So I want to make sure that people are, feel like they have not only a career path, but they have like a mentor and friend that they're working side by side with, as well, as something that has been really important to me. Because I don't know, I've had kind of those hardcore bosses where like it's butts and seats, that kind of stuff, and it's just not a pleasurable way to work. And I think when people are happy, they do better work.
Right. A question from my end. I think this is we've struck down a very interesting path, and I think this is very valuable for people. Building systems, you brought up as like a new skill you needed to learn. My question is, what's your process for building systems? Because if you look at a problem, I think your process is very important, because you can either spend 6 hours building a system that doesn't work at all, or you can spend the same amount of time and have something works flawlessly. So how do you do it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think that there's going to be different answers for other people. But for me, there's a few things that I hone in on. 1, what do I want the desired outcome to be? That sounds cheesy, but like start with the end in mind. Like, why am I needing a system? 2, how often do I need to run this system? Because sometimes you can get into like programmer head. So I used to code a lot, and you would spend 10 hours to write a script that will do everything for you that it would have just taken an hour to do. If it just takes you an hour to do and you're only doing it every quarter, it might not be the best thing to put resources to build that system. Whereas if you're doing something and you're running that system every day, then it really makes sense to build a system around that. So be careful. I wouldn't say systematize everything. Like, sometimes it's just easier to get it done. So that's something to make sure that it warrants the resources to build the system, have the end goal in mind, and then ultimately figure out how other people, if they weren't involved in the process, could then get value from that process. And so it's kind of weird where I start from the extra, because then that simplifies things for me, where it's like, if somebody from the outside looking in couldn't understand this, then it's not going to be super helpful. Because that was one of the things that I want my systems to do, is to be able to free information or expose information to people that can then sync asynchronously, where you don't have to be super involved. So those are kind of the 3 things that, do I really need it? Who can access it? And then how can they make sure that they get value from it? And then I forgot the third, but the inside out.
If the system is actually necessary, I think
if it warrants exactly, yeah, if it warrants it. So and then I just did that, and I just started slamming stuff against the wall in Notion. Oh, do I want to do it like this? Do I want to do it like that? We actually started in Asana, which isn't bad. But Asana has a bunch of guardrails, so there's a lot of things that you can't do, but that's really helpful for people that don't want to go down this really gnarly path, whereas Notion is just this free ocean of whatever you want to do. So there's definitely some advantages to just starting in Asana and kind of getting it done there, but we have so many like nested things within Notion that you can build some really intricate things that now it's our pretty much everything space, where people were kind of getting annoyed to have to live in 2 different systems. And that, I guess that would be the last thing I would add is the process and understanding how information flows through is more important than the tool you use to implement it with. And so that is something that, again, we started Asana and then moved to Notion, because even though it was a little messier, there was just so many other things that people can do. And so now in marketing, we have this master database that everything goes into, that's then sliced and filtered. And you can do all this kind of crazy cool roll-up stuff that we didn't start out with at the beginning. So don't be afraid to change and pivot if the system isn't serving you, because that's ultimately the whole point of the system, is to get time back and understand, like, basically I have a Notion page where I can see what all my direct reports are working on at one point in time. I can drill down, I can comment, I can do this thing. So it's this like nice neural network of productivity that I can just tap in and out of, and I don't have to feel like I'm lost or I need to call somebody or understand what's going on here, or where is this project. And so it gives me a really nice direct line of communication, which was kind of the biggest goal of the system in the first place.
Yeah, nice. Jacob, do you maybe have any questions?
Not at this point, no.
Yeah, I think maybe for me, a lot of people who might be listening, whether they run an e-com store or some people run agencies, really a lot of them, they might be, these human unicorns where they know marketing, they know how to copyright, creatives, whatever, basically a lot of things. What are like your top 3 actionable tips for someone to go from being like a glorified freelancer to actually becoming an executive?
Yeah, I mean, that's a big glorified freelancer. That's a big jump. I mean, the big thing that I would say is just keep sharpening the saw. And so ultimately just keep, like, I had done all these kind of crazy, weird things that it's weird in the way, like, you can start as a generalist, then you go to a specialist, and then an executive is, again, more of like a generalist, where you're not building, you're not like I haven't touched an ad account in months, where like that's all I lived in when I was running my agency. So I think the bigger thing is making sure you have the skill set. So really having some sort of wedge to get into the door. So for me, it was not only a high level acumen in terms of marketing, but also storytelling. I was very good at, because of the agency. Like, you have to be able to portray the story, a narrative building, and then the economics of understanding the numbers of a business, what we need to drive forward. So I think an executive, it's hard to nail down like a pathway. That was one of the things that excited me about TripleWhale, whereas I'm 37. So being able to step into the C-suite at 37 really excited me. So I guess the 3 actionable tips, I would say, always make yourself better today than you were yesterday. So always become better. Like, don't waste days, because when your opportunity comes, there's nothing worse than you not being prepared for it. So that's something that is like, there's no way I would have plotted this path to CMO, where it's just another really cheesy thing that I'm almost hesitant to say, but I'll do it anyways, is so like vision board, and kind of try and manifest what you want. So actually, before I came on to TripleWhale, I had actually wrote down on my vision board, I want to be a CMO for a company that I believe in, care about, and that's going to do good in the world. And I want to do it in under 2 years. And I did it in under a year. So have some sort of goal that you can manifest, I think, is really, really important. That's a little hippy dippy, so it's not super actionable, but just have something that you're constantly working towards, and things will start to open up. And then the last thing that I would say, honestly, is get to a point where you can generate value for people without any reciprocity. And so just doing good in the world, helping other people out, helping other people down their path, learn, talk to people, network, like go to as many things as you can. And as you solidify yourself as a leader in that space, when an executive position comes up, they're going to go, hey, I know that Jacob guy's a crusher. Let's reach out to him. Or you can kind of, like, I get texts all the time for big companies that aren't promoting it, but that are looking for CMOs. Just from friends that are either in the space, like, hey, do you know any killers that you think would make a good role for that? So I think networking is a really big thing that you can do not only online, but also in person. I'm a big believer in you have to know you, like you, trust you before you transact. And you can do all 3 of those things in person. In person just doesn't scale very well. And that's why Twitter is great. LinkedIn's starting to pop off. But being able to really command the space, and then be able to manifest and know what your goal is, what you wanting to do, and then just generating value for people for free. And that's not to say like every single person's like, hey, can I pick your brain? Like, no, I hate that. But at the same time, like you can go out and give people constructive feedback and things of that nature to really help them along their journey. And I do think that there's a certain karmic balance that comes back. around. And I don't think you should do that for that payoff. You should do it just to, help people out. And lastly, in a weird way, it's selfish, because when you teach, you really have to understand. It's like teaching is an expression of a mastery of the subject that you're teaching. And so if you can teach it well, then you really have a good grasp on that subject. And so it can also help you understand why you have the views you have, or these things where sometimes you have beliefs or practices that you do, but you don't understand why until you teach them.
Mm-hmm. But before we move on to like the more technical stuff, like an interesting question for me, like as the CMO of like a fast-growing SaaS company, like what are the decisions you make on a daily basis? Like what are the most important things you do? You obviously hop on meetings, but like what kind of decisions do you focus on?
Yeah, it's a great question. So every CMO I see as a capital allocator. And so how I get X amount of dollars to spend every month, so I put quarterly budgets, and those quarterly budgets are then spliced up into months. But how do I deploy that capital? So every day, that's what I'm thinking about is, okay, should I sponsor this? Who should I get in bed with? Who should I be giving money to? What kind of swag should we make? What kind of collabs should we do? What are some marketing things that we can do? What's our conversion rate? How can we up our conversion rate? What's the kind of state of the company? Why is the company in that state? So the three pillars that I really care about is community, content, and education. Those are kind of our three marketing pillars. Paid strategy is also bolted onto that, but people just don't buy SaaS with paid ads. So it's a very minimal part of our strategy. It's more so like a CPG, consumer product goods type of company, where we want to be omnipresent. We want to be almost synonymous with Shopify. So you start a Shopify store and then you install TripleWhale. And so that's the decisions ultimately, is capital allocation is the number one thing, is where am I spending my money? What's the return on that investment? Should I spend it again there? Are there new opportunities that I'm not seeing? What are some outside the box bets that we can make? So like I was telling you guys offline, we just filmed a reality TV show with everything in the TV show's D2C products from our clients, and it's in this penthouse and all this stuff. So it could be really awesome, or it could flop, but it wasn't a huge capital allocator. So I like to do about 10 to 20% of my budget on these moonshot projects, and then 80% of the budget is on sponsorships, affiliates, in real life events, swag, community, sponsoring YouTube stuff. So that's something that we're really into right now, is YouTubes and podcast sponsorships, really just owning that brain space where it's not necessarily direct response, but it's again more of that omnipresence of I want to be everywhere. So I mean, we might start doing some out of home stuff with billboards or buses or subways, things of that nature. But those are kind of the decisions of where's my money going? What's the return on it? Where could I be spending more money? Where should I cut back? And then the last thing that's kind of, we're getting out of it, but at the very beginning, it's hiring. Hiring's insanely hard. Hiring is so hard. And especially in this current market, it's kind of normalizing now, but it's really expensive as well. So hiring is probably 70% of my time before like last month was probably spent on hiring, just getting the team in place, getting everybody up to speed, letting people run. And the higher level hires aren't as arduous, because you can basically just say, here's a bunch of money, Jacob, I need you to fix X, Y, and Z. And these higher level people just get it. Whereas you start to hire beneath them. And there's not like a beneath them in terms of pejorative, just somebody that will then roll up to somebody else or more specialists. Those people actually need to be managed. And so more headcount doesn't necessarily mean more productivity. And so that's a quagmire that I think you can fall into sometimes, where it's like these people aren't just autonomous beings that can just figure it out, especially outside of those kind of bigger hires. So those are kind of all over the place stuff, but ultimately it came down to hiring, capital allocation, and then am I missing anything? If I'm not missing anything, what could I be pushing harder into? And then if I'm pushing hard into something, is it worth it, or should I kill it?
Amazing. Then I know Jacob has a question he likes to ask at the end of the podcast, so do the honors.
Yeah, so a bit more of a personal question. So if you had to give one piece of advice to your 20-year-old self, what would that be?
Yeah. So it'd be one of two. One, it would be find a mentor. I still really haven't found a mentor yet. Shout out Kenny, Mentor Pass is pretty awesome. But finding like a mentor to really emulate and being taken under their wing is something that I would say. And then the other thing I would say is work hard but have fun. Like, you can get old quick. Like, I'm 37 now, and I keep meeting all you guys crushing the world in your 20s. And so I think there's a certain aspect of when you're a high performer, or you want to be a high performer and you're working really hard, there needs to be a reason for that work. And so making sure that you don't lose sight of your purpose and what makes you happy is something that I would definitely tell my 20-year-old self as well, because you can get caught in just the work, and then you wake up one day and you're old and you're like, well, all I did was work my whole life. So I think you want to make sure that you have a deep purpose. And then if I could throw a third one in there too, just make sure that you build deep connections with humans you care about. Like, that would be the ancillary one, where it's like, it's really important, where I'm a big believer in happiness is only real when shared. And so being able to find that people that really light you up, whether that is a romantic relationship or just friendships in general, where it's cool to share success and then also lean on each other during dark times.
If you thought this episode was valuable, share it with a friend that might find this information useful, and leave a 5-star review so we can reach more influential people and bring lessons back to you. Now, I'll see you in the next episode.